Okay.
Right?
I'm not, there are several very early ones, like in the 1680s, 1690s. And Huard, is it something like Huard? Or with an H at the beginning?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I think, because I know he has, he's like probably one of the, if not the earliest, one of the earliest. But this was part of a trend. And they were going to Geneva first, but Lokla became open. It was more interesting because there were less watchmakers for competition, so you could open up shop and have business without as much competition. And labor would have been cheaper, I suppose, relatively. In Geneva, it would have been a more expensive city. But
If the France is original country for watchmaking?
well, I'm not exactly sure where the first clock comes from worldwide. I know in Germany and the lowlands, they were making clocks quite early. But maybe Germany in the 1500s, so mid-15th century. I'm not actually sure. That's a good question. But should we start in a few minutes or? Oh, okay. We'll give a few more minutes and then we'll start. So hello, thank you, and welcome again to the second series of lectures. My name is Mike Montandon, and we are talking about, last time we discussed the beginnings of watchmaking in Switzerland and how religion actually caused it to be transported in a form of technology transfer as a result of the wars of religion. Now, today I would like to discuss some of the patents and the observatory chronometric tests, which are quite important in this story. So we'll be discussing the Montandon family's legacy in this regard. So I hope to cover innovations by these makers, patents, observatory trials, why patents and observatory trials matter, protection and application of technological advancements, and observatory trials as a mark of ultimate 19th century horological precision. So basically, it should be remembered that the engine of technological innovation, these are these patents, basically. And, pardon me. It's probably quite hard for you to read. But, so in the 19th century, this was a period of fierce technological development in horological matters. Watchmakers were racing to improve precision, durability, manufacturing efficiency, and patents became a way to protect this. This was also commercial innovation basis once you have a patent. And this was encouraging investment in the company. So this would bring capital into their research after one would have these patents. But these patents were generally touching escapements, complications, regulating systems, keyless winding mechanisms, which was quite big revolution, and also shock protection and anti-magnetism. Now, by the way, as far as shock protection goes, there's a very interesting technology that was used in the 19th century called this parachute mechanism, compensation parachute. So this was something that if you dropped the watch, this parachute would basically save the insides. So this was a really interesting anti-shock technology that was adapted very early. And those watches that had it were extremely expensive at the time. So, but for many of these journeymen watchmakers or the smaller watch shops, patents were a route to technical prestige, and sometimes this could be equated into, hey, social mobility. They created and documented the legacy of their competence through these patents. So we have firms like Breguet, Ulysse Nardin, Vacheron, and Constantin. They built their reputations not through fine finishing, but also through their patented mechanisms. So among the Montandons, we have such figures as Henri Louis of Besançon, who we spoke of last time. We saw his son's catalog, watch catalog. But we also have a very interesting Fritz Montandon, who was in Zurich, and I'll be showing some of his inventions. Also Maurice Montandon of Geneva. So they were all using patents to cement their technical influence in France and Switzerland. And in the start of my research, I have discovered that this family has upwards of 50, it's over 50 patents to their name. So that's a high concentration of patent making in one family. But they were able to do patents in various different areas. Now, and we will be, this is very hard to see actually right now, but we will be looking at, this is one of the patents that we'll be discussing. This is for a perpetual calendar device. Now, observatory trials. This was very important for scientific validation. While patents rewarded innovation, chronometric trials rewarded precision. So these were conducted at the so-called holy temples of timekeeping: Geneva, Neuchâtel, Kew Teddington in England, and Besançon in France. And these trials measured a watch by testing in multiple positions for accuracy, suspended, etc. They exposed them to temperature variations. They would put them in the so-called the furnace or the oven, and they would also put them on ice and see if they continued to work accurately. But they were evaluating the isochronism and rate stability. Isochronism, this is the property of a watch's balance wheel to have the same oscillation period, the time for one swing, regardless of the amplitude of its swing. So this is very crucial for accurate timekeeping, a consistent rate even when the mainspring's power decreases. So that's what we mean when we're talking about this isochronism. So when they would go to these trials, they were generally held at observatories. They had the scientific equipment for measuring these. And they would release or issue this Bulletin de Marche, or it's also called Bulletin d'Observatoire. And this is a paper that demonstrated a watch's ability to pass these rigorous tests. And this would increase the value of a watch. Any watch having this, the value would be and that goes for today as well. As a matter of fact, I understand that the Besançon Observatory actually conducted such, and nobody does these really anymore like they used to. But for one of Kari Voutilainen's watches, one of his customers requested this, so they actually rediscovered how to do chronometer testings in the old fashion, like they did in the 19th century. But these competitions were more than academic exercises. They were public stages of scientific legitimacy. And winning a bulletin d'observatoire was considered the highest badge of precision in the horological world. So companies printed these results in their catalogs, on advertisements, and they could even be, the medals could even be displayed from these on the watches themselves. But for an independent watchmaker, observatory success could launch an international career. And for firms, it was a weapon in commercial rivalry. So Ulysse Nardin, he was dominating in the marine chronometer competitions. Patek Philippe was using observatory results to conquer the elite markets. Longines and Omega began their industrial rise through precision contests. Ulysse Montandon was participating in this whole chronometric culture. He's the big chronometer champion in the family. So he had a slew of watches that between 1896 and 1899, he was everywhere, winning all the biggest prizes. So, and then Cercleux and Montandon of Besançon, they also submitted chronometers to testing. And I counted over 40 watches in a 10-year period. So all of these, and these were all that passed, but all of these would have gotten a much higher price when it was realized for sale. So, but this is the reason for these chronometric testing. So let us talk about these patents. And I did bring, if you have seen this, this is a modern version, more or less, 20th century, early 20th century. This was a calibre vérifié. It was patented in 1857, and this is the original French patent. It was patented by Montandon Frères, Paris, and Rambouillet. And this later went to the son, Alfred Montandon. He was controlling the factory at Rambouillet, but he also had sales in Paris. But this technology was quite impressive, and it's one of 5 European systems in use. There's the Robert system, the Martin system, Montandon, etc. But this is still in use today. And this is, we do see, basically the springs could be inserted, and this is for both clocks and watches. But they also had a fusee version. But basically, you could measure the thickness of these springs, and also the barrel sizes as well. And originally, this was a bronze, or rather brass piece with a steel insert. And later, they would change the designs. But this is the first interesting patent we have. And this was also, you can see in the top left that this is the patent number there, 31660, and right below it for the year 15 years. So all these patents were issued for 15 years. Now, after a patent ran out, of course, then other companies or individuals could compete with their own modifications, etc. So, and we also, what I find interesting is they also even put their maker's mark in this. Basically, this was an early feature when they created these in the beginning. So it's rather nice to see that. Now, there are a lot of different types of calibers that they made. Like here's Montandon Fusee, and I actually found this one. It just says AM Paris or Paris. So this is Alfred Montandon, and here you can see it's calibre aux hauteurs de roue de cylindre. So, and this is échelle au dixième de millimètre. So this is 1/10 of a millimeter. This is for 1/10 of a millimeter. And this is also known as échelle Montandon. We see this by Henri Picard et Fils, the company who was producing these for them. But they had a lot. Montandon Frères, actually, this is the biggest company in the family. They had a lot of patents. And these are all of their patents between 1847 and 1869. And if you have any questions about either the technology or usage or what have you, just please interrupt me at any time. Have you seen, so you have seen the basic models on eBay, yeah? Another big inventor, thank you very much. Another big inventor that we have is this individual in Besançon, Henri Louis. He had more patents than any other individual in Besançon. He had actually a total of 7 patents. There is an 8th patent by a Montandon maker in Besançon, but it was actually improperly attributed to Henri Louis. This is actually Charles Auguste. But he had a series of very interesting patents, which I would like to discuss. So we do see that he had his first patent from 1856. This is for système de remontoir au pendant pour montre. So this is like a very specialized winding system. One of his others was a système de montre indiquant l'heure à 2 méridiens différentes. So this is a watch that has that indicates 2 different time zones, two meridians. Later, he came up with système de montre indiquant les minutes sans confusion. So this is to indicate the minutes without confusion. So these are some small little improvements that he was finding. One of his more interesting ones was actually this right here. And this is an actual photo from 1864. This came from the patent. But this was for keeping world time. And essentially, you had a globe, and you could suspend watches at different areas for different times and keep track this way. But this was actually auctioned by, was it Christie's or one of the big English auction houses? This came up for sale, and I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw that somebody still had one of these. It may be unique. I don't know how many of these he made, but now this one is quite interesting. This is his last patent called Montre du Travailleur. This is a workman's watch, and this is the original picture from the patent. And you would actually twist here. You would twist the stem for winding. And it was a very inexpensive watch. So a lot of his watches in the beginning were the key wind. But then he had this invention, and actually I'm not sure how successful this was, that I have not at least found a watch that has this technology. Now, unfortunately, this is really hard to see. It doesn't really come through, but we have a series of different cadran designs for timekeeping. Okay, so, we see if I can't reduce this, because we can't really see the patents. Not sure if this is. I'm not sure how to change the brightness, but this, basically we have, this is Charles Auguste Montandon Clerc's own design. Now he had actually this is a stem winding model. Actually, does anybody know how to adjust the light? Perhaps I could try to, it's really a pity that this isn't visible. Quite a be this. No. Okay, I think we have to survive with it. Well, basically, this is really interesting. You can barely see some of the lines. This is basically a Geneva bar, sort of the FHF style movement. And this one? I can try that. No, it doesn't. It also doesn't come. But him and his partner, this is Charles Auguste. He basically went into business with an individual named Louis Michel Cercle, and the pair formed a 10-year partnership based on this, which you sadly can't see, this movement, and all of their watches were following this. And now they were sending these to the observatory for these chronometer tests. So here we can actually see this patent. And it actually doesn't state that it's Charles, but I did find out it did belong to him because there is a handwritten version of this also with all of the stamps, etc. But let us continue. Okay, this is really the maker that I want to illustrate. So Fritz Montandon, he was an extremely talented individual. And we find him doing all kinds of different patent research, etc. But one of his early patents from 1895 was this right here. It's actually a tourne brooch. So this brooch would open, and inside it was a perpetual calendar. So he figured this out. He actually patented it and began selling it. And this was actually noticed by this Mr. Victor Bierstecker, who wrote a letter to Camille Flammarion, who is the head. He was one of the major founders of the observatories in France, Besançon, etc. But he was an astronomer and scientist. And we find this original letter from 1895 discussing this invention. But Fritz, he is actually the brother of the chronometer champion, this Ulysse Montandon-Robert, who was participating in all the observatory trials. So these two are brothers, and definitely a very talented family. You see that? So another one of Fritz's inventions was this odometer, compteur de vitesse, and this was patented in the early 20th century. Actually, we find the American and British ones after 1904. And this was later adapted. We can see how it works with the car's wheel. But this was later adapted for boats. So this is he continued through with this, and this would have been in the 19-teens. But we have this early speedometer or odometer system, and here he just says Système F Montandon, but this is Fritz. So, and we have his patents. And this would have been the original device right there. So that would have been mounted on a car. Okay, so now Fritz, he was highly involved in theoretical watchmaking, and in 1922 we find his essay. It's called La Montre Normale, and this was Essai de Unification. So he is talking about all the watch theories, and there's a lot of charts in this and diagrams. And really interesting chart that this has is this. It's a table of proportions for springs and barrels, based on now the formulas are for. You can actually find the number of turns and the amount of power involved. So I found this very interesting. He also has these for the linear system, calculating it, in all sizes of linea. Now, average watches in the 19th century, say 1860, we're talking about 19 linea was the average. But a big watch, 22 linea, this is already 50 and a half millimeters diameter. But he was very competent, and it was interesting to find this essay that he wrote in 1922. And I did find an article specifically stating that he was living in Zurich, but had lived in Lokla and La Chaux-de-Fonds in the years. So it was immediately clear which Fritz this was because of that article. Now, Fritz also had a lot of collaborations with other watchmakers. And there's another famous one, Nathan Weil, and we find this repeater plate patent. This is a plate for a repeater watch, and then it's really useful because it says which individual and their addresses in La Chaux-de-Fonds at the time. So we can tell once again, who was behind this. And this was actually published in 1905, but we have, it's really, I actually own this original patent, so I have this in my collection. But it is very fortunate to be able to unearth these types of patent, especially, we can see the measurement, basically the depictions for the movement itself. So you're able to understand by reading the text and comparing it with the diagrams. Because a lot of times on the patents, you don't have all the information. You might only have the picture, or you might only have the text. So this is really fortunate. Now, in more modern watchmaking, there was this very interesting Maurice Montandon that I discovered. He's the last big Montandon Blaise Leon. This is the family that was behind Montandon Frères. Now, Maurice was living at some certain time in Paris doing watchmaking, but later in Geneva. And this 1937 patent, this is probably right before he died. We have this self-winding timepiece by oscillating weight. The present invention relates to a timepiece with automatic winding by means of an oscillating mass. This part is characterized in that the mass oscillates around the center of the movement and rotates around a pivoting axis in the frame of this movement and in the back of the part. So this became quite, this is still in use today. So this is one of the earliest patents behind this technology. Are you familiar with this? Has anybody seen these discs that swing when you walk? Yeah. So this is the early history. And I also found a very fascinating patent by Arist Ulis Montandon. And this actually does not relate to watchmaking, but it's fascinating. It shows how flexible they were. This was for recording a telephone number to a telephonic station. There was a big problem, and it states actually in the description that there was a big problem at this time that people would call numbers, and they were getting billed for all kinds of erroneous things. So the telephone company actually needed a way of determining what number was called, and et cetera, and who spoke to whom for how long. This device solved that problem. So you have to be either a micromechanical or a watchmaker to do these types of things. But this was interesting, and this shows the diverse reach that these watchmakers had, that they actually were thinking about solving all kinds of problems. And now, I did do a video on this because it was really interesting, but we briefly spoke about this. But the Cercle and Montandon, so they had over 40 watches that they presented at the observatory for these testings. And so I went there, and I actually went through all of their books. They have these huge books these were the actual books that when the competitions happened, they recorded them there. And they have a very intricate code on scientifically determining the time, etc. But this was really, really good to see this type of information. But it's not published anywhere. You have to actually go there to be able to get access to this. But it shows the way that they tested it. And these tests could be for a week, or they could be for a month. They varied. There were different types of testing routines. But if you could pass the more rigorous ones, then you really had the community's attention, because this is definitely what they're aiming for, this type of precision. So, and this is the actually, you can see the equipment in the observatory. So this was the mid 1880s in Besançon. They opened this observatory, and now it's just a museum, obviously. But we see that these watchmakers went to these venues because these trial results, they equaled success. So this was fame, reputation, sales, and added value, basically. And this is the reason for, and I imagine that they had to pay something to enter these as well. But obviously this would be returned when they would sell the watch on. But all of the information on what kind of watches were submitted are here. In certain cases, you have special springs, or they have Phillips curve, for example. Basically, the technical characteristics would be described here, so that you knew exactly what kind of watch, and then the serial number of the device, etc. So, and then who was submitting it would. So basically, we have very good records in that regard. Okay, so astronomical, this is so-called astronomical horology, these observatory trials. And I wanted to show you a few things about this Julius Montandon. So this is Fritz's brother. And you see, this is from a British newspaper where Julius is selling the watches. And he mentions that these are by serial number and the marks that are received at the observatory tests, and then the price. And we have, so we can see exactly what he was selling. And this is around 1899, 1888, or 1898, 1899. But we see what sort of prices he's getting for these higher marks. Certificates can be sent for examinations. This is really, I mean, really interesting how he's has these all especially good. So these were getting really high marks, but we can see, we can read everything on how well they placed. And these are all 18 karat. This 18 CT. This is gold cases, 18 karat, and then the characteristics, etc. Is it a quarter repeater or etc. But this is the way Julius was signing his dials now. That his watches, and this was actually an unused dial that I found. But now he was based in Geneva at this place called Place de la Fusterie, and actually it's a square. And at the square, on top of this building, I found a picture from the 1890s, which recorded, we can see here his sign, and we can see he has a symbol for a watch for sales, but he also has the medals that he won at these trials. And actually, he mentions his success at these. Now he's chronometers, répétition, chronographe, etc. Montres simples de toute grandeur. So simple watches of all sizes. These are his wins that he got. 18 prizes and 6 honorable mentions from 1893 to 1899. First prize he won in 1893 and in 1898. Second prize at the International concours in 1896, and he had the best average of points in the collection of all of the bulletins issued. So he had the highest score for 4 years at the Kew Observatory tests between 1896 and 1899. And then he also mentions that he was taking place in the Paris 1900 exhibition, where they won as a group, basically. But he has a lot of claim to fame. He's definitely the biggest chronometer champion. His watches have been for sale on auction, and several have even come with letters where he is actually telling the owners how to care for these watches, but also including the Bulletin de Marche, or the observatory bulletin. So, but this is just a little bit of how they, why they wanted these tests, why these tests were important, and how far they went with this. But does anybody have any questions?
Do you know how many watches were submitted in the races on the Grand Prix?
Yeah, that's a good question. There could be hundreds. There could be hundreds. And actually, there was a Neuchâtel observatory test in 1877, and I think there were over 300. And there was one young man who actually, his first time submitting, he was in 24th place. So he was in the top 10%. He was like 22 years old. He died when he was 22, actually. He was 20 years old when that competition happened. So that's incredible if you think a 20-year-old can place in the top 10%. You know, but these were something that brought people together, and you could get business contracts based on people would come knocking on your door after they see, because it's the precision that they're interested in. But thanks for the question. Anybody else have any questions about patents or? They don't have any competitions like that here in Helsinki, do they? I think they should, because there would be a lot of talent. Yeah. You know, patents, of course, anybody can file a patent, but it's quite expensive. It's quite expensive to file the patent. However, if it's something that somebody will be interested in investing in later, I mean, they have the same situation then as now. That on the basis of, for example, the Charles August one that you couldn't really see, he actually, on the basis of his 1880 stem winding improved chronometer, he was able to get a partnership with this Louis Michel Cercle. Now, Cercle actually went into business with him paying, was it 50,000 francs? And then Charles paid 30,000 francs only. So, but Charles was actually making the watches, but it was on the basis of this patent that Cercle wanted to have a business with him. So this is sort of the way it worked. Actually, I can show you this from the Cercle and Montandon. This is the original acte de société that they formed. And this gave exactly how they cooperated, where they were located, who did what. Now, with them, Cercle was actually a traveling salesman, and he was going on selling these watches, and Charles was actually producing the watches in Besançon and taking them to the observatory for testing, increasing the value, and then they would sell them. And let's see, there was another interesting. Okay, so yeah, here's the whole act. So in Article 12, it actually says here that pendant sa durée, so during the activity, the society will utilize exclusively a winding movement, which is the property of the inventor, that's Charles. And basically, the patent will remain his property. And the costs necessary for utilizing the patent will be borne by the company, basically. Well, this is really interesting that he get to keep his technology to himself, but he used it for work. But this partnership lasted for 10 years. So it was two 5-year chunks, and at the end of 5 years, the partners had a chance to continue, or they could have ceased it. But since things were going relatively well for them, they stayed together. So that's basically the most I can offer today. I wanted to touch these patents so you can see the huge variety of what they were involved in. This obviously this went outside of watchmaking, like the telephonic equipment, but observatory trials are something that there's a lot of historic information in these results that we can pull that tell us exactly what kind of watchmaker we're dealing with, what was their level of competency, how were they competing against their competitors, etc. So, for example, Julius Montandon was beating Patek Philippe and Julius Nardin at that time. In the late 1890s, he was the really big champion. But that's pretty much all I have, unless you have any other questions.
When were last pieces productive?
So the last watch, well, as far as antique horology, the last makers, they ceased around 1930s. There was this Alphonse Montandon Bandelier. He was in La Chaux-de-Fonds, but he was working with, he appears to have had a lot of American companies that he was working with, where he was supplying the movements, but they were making the cases. And you find a lot of these a World War I era between 1909 and 1919 about these Star watch case company, these little gold watches. But there is a modern maker that is making marine chronometers, Daniel Montandon, but he hasn't made a watch for probably 4 or 5 years, I think. He's the last one who puts his name on a watch. But basically, most of them went around the time that World War I started, the business, and then the last of them around the Great Depression. So Alphonse actually died in, was it 1930, and his son Leopold basically carried on for the last couple of years, but then liquidated. So this brand has been largely forgotten, and even though they have a huge legacy in this development of Swiss watchmaking, as we mentioned during the first time, there was a watchmaker who was associated with 4 U.S. presidents, Julien Montandon. They immigrated in 1815, and he served 3 presidents, but his sister worked for Thomas Jefferson, so he probably knew Thomas Jefferson also. But interesting connection. He was showing his inventions. Sadly, I don't have any of his inventions. I can't find information other than that they existed. That we do know that he had this watch that could tell 1/60th of a second. He took it to the president in the Oval Office and showed it to John Quincy Adams, and the Department of the Artillery purchased these, so they were using them in artillery experiments. And he also had thermometer watches, metallic thermometers. Basically, he had a lot of different inventions, but I'm not able to locate any of them since he died in 1851, and he was mainly active in Washington, D.C. between 1827 and then 1850, roughly.
So America was the main market.
Well, so Montandon first, and we spoke about this last time, but it's basically divided into 2 parts. In Paris, we had Paris and Rambouillet. They were doing the watch and clock springs. So Montandon First Locle was the watchmaking side, and they were producing for North America. They had offices in New York, San Francisco, New Orleans. They also had London and Mexico City and Veracruz. And then they were all over the South America. Actually, South America was probably their biggest brand. I found several articles where they were warning people to beware of counterfeiters in the Mexican press from 1866 and 1871. So it was a brand that had the name because of all these wins, these exhibitions. And the word of mouth, your fame and reputation traveled by word of mouth from these shows, and that's why people were interested in obtaining these watches. They heard about how good they were.
Have you found any counterfeits of the watches?
Well, sort of. There's actually one on eBay for sale that says H. Montandon Watchmakers, and I think it's probably at least the dial, but possibly a movement. But it's put inside a watch, and they're selling it for $2,000 or something like that. But and they're saying it's 1920s, which this maker had been long gone by that time. And actually, H. Montandon Watchmakers made solely or only exclusively gold watches. I can't find a single silver watch. Every single one is gold from like about 60 pieces. And that's why a lot of times they show up, when they do show up, it's only a movement, because in lean times, like right now, the price of gold is over 4,000 an ounce. So people are basically taking that, selling, and then selling off the movements separately. So. But yeah, I haven't really, actually somebody asked me to authenticate a watch over the weekend, that there's an individual who found a Montandon in Geneva, and he wanted me to verify that it was a legitimate piece. And this maker, I actually am familiar with this maker. It's also one of those, you're not 100% sure who was behind the name. There are 3 or 4 contenders, but that watch was legitimate. It was a 1845 to 1855 circa piece, and silver key wine, key set pocket watch. So yeah, these can sometimes appear a little bit beat up. Like a lot of these like watches, for example, Montandon and Company, which I do think was Henri in Besançon. He actually worked for Vacheron Constantin for at least a year and a half, I think, in Geneva, but he was trying to replicate a lot of times their styles. But those watches signed Montandon and Co. Geneva, they have almost, they have a sprayed on metal basically, or it's plaqué, it's so-called plated. It's plated, and that does not age nicely. It's not a friend of time. So if there is a precious metal plated on that, and 140 or 50 years go by, then it's really thin. It's very, a lot of times it's basically almost all gone. So you can't tell what material was really there. But this plaqué was an interesting, that was mid 19th century, this plaqué plated, they were plating with the precious metals, and it would have looked really beautiful when it was produced or fabricated, but it just doesn't stay there because of grease or hand. When you touch it, it just basically slowly erodes. But yes, if you don't have any other questions, thank you very much, and I appreciate your attendance.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.